what you think of what's happened to the media in Hong Kong, because you said you came with the Far Eastern Economic Review and you've been involved in some of the other English language papers in Hong Kong. What do you think is happening now to the media?
Well, it's sad. I mean, there's no free media. I was the editor in chief of both the South China Morning Post and the Standard, where I was also the publisher. And I'd be lying if I said there was no political pressure. This was back in the early 2000s, but it was okay. It was tolerable. You could have pretty gutsy and good reporting. By the way, Apple Daily, Jimmy Lai's newspaper, was a lot gutsier than the English language press, and well, they had a lot more people, and they just had an ethos of really pushing uncovering corruption, uncovering all sorts of wrongdoing, as well as pushing for democracy. Those days are finished. You can't. There's no real criticism. I don't really want to name names, but if you look at some of the coverage of Jimmy Lai's trial in the English language press, it's pathetic. It's just so slanted, and it's just it's sounding like a government mouthpiece. I mean, there was an English language publication. It came out of China called China Daily. That was the English language version was set up around the time of the handover from Britain to China in 1997. And look, that's fine. It's a Chinese government paper. You read it. You want to see what the government line is. That's fine. Unfortunately, the South China Morning Post, which was one of the leading publications, one of the leading English language newspapers in Asia, has become a lot more like it had ambitions after it was bought by Alibaba. Had ambitions to become a kind of Chinese language New York Times. Well, sorry to say, it's become a lot more like People's Daily than the New York Times.
Yeah, well, I actually do like China Daily because they criticized us as being disgraceful anti-China garbage.
Good. You must be doing something right. I mean, you know what the government line is, right?
We did put that on a T-shirt. So there are still some media companies that are, I guess, maybe trying to do, maybe not exactly what Apple Daily is doing, but like I'm thinking of Hong Kong Free Press, which is in English, the Epoch Times, which is in Chinese there. Those are both not pro-Beijing, right? Why have they not been targeted as hard as Apple Daily, or have they been? And it hasn't been publicly reported very much.
Well, let me say, I mean, I'd kind of loath to say too much, except that I would say that the people who are running those publications feel that they're skating on very thin ice, and they don't. I mean, when we're running Apple Daily, we didn't wake up every morning thinking if we push the button on this story, is it going to mean that we're going to be shut down? I think there are unclear lines, but there are lines that you can't go beyond now. And I think that there are other places, by the way, in Chinese that are doing decent reporting, good reporting. I think they're trying to keep it more narrow, trying to keep it away from politics, trying to be very factual, and work within constraints that didn't exist 10 years ago. So I don't want to make it sound like it's it's not as bad as mainland China, but there's much less room for maneuver. And I think day to day, these news organizations just they just don't know how much longer they don't know when things might end. And that's the other thing that's just quite unbelievable. We were killed when John Lee, who's now the chief executive or the mayor, was the secretary for security. And he sent a letter to us under his authority as the Secretary for Security, saying that he suspected, he had reason to believe that we'd broken the national security law. No evidence, didn't mention a single article, but he said because he thought that, he was going to freeze our bank accounts. So, we had 600,000. Think of it, 600,000 digital subscribers. We were doing pretty well. We were just in the middle of actually really far along on the road of making the transition from paper to digital. Overnight, zero cash coming in because the banks were threatened with jail for their executives if they processed any credit card payments for us. We couldn't pay the electricity bill. We couldn't pay ink. We couldn't do anything. And by the way, that case that John Lee's beliefs have actually not been tested in court. They never found Apple Daily guilty. I guess that's in a way implicitly what they're trying to do now. But you think of one man say so, just shut things down. We've seen Stand News and other publications that have just been shut down, NGOs shut down under a variety of legal or quasi-legal pretexts. So I'm really happy that things like Hong Kong Free Press, Epoch Times, and some other ones are doing what they can, but the parameters are much, much narrower, and their position is much, much more perilous.
What was the moment that you realized you needed to get out of Hong Kong?
Well, I didn't actually, and that's a really interesting question because it was something that people were talking about after the national security law was announced, and even some before that. I had a monthly column in the South China Morning Post. I was running a group called the Asia Business Council, and people would say to me, even some of my board members at the Asia Business Council, because I was doing a lot publicly with Jimmy, especially after the national security law came in, and they were very nice about it. Like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine," But I think implicitly, I realized later they were like, "Are you really okay? Are you really sure what you're doing?" And I actually, kind of randomly, but I thought, well, maybe I should just kind of lighten up a bit. And I'd been in Hong Kong 28 years, and I got a shipment together and moved, kind of books and furniture and art, just in case I needed to leave in a hurry. And then that shipment arrived, and I thought, well, I should go and unload the shipment. And it was during COVID, so it's kind of mixed up with all the COVID material. And then a couple of weeks later, Jimmy's jailed, and they mentioned my name. And honestly, I probably still would have gone back, except I didn't want to go through 2 or 3 weeks of quarantine. And then, of course, after they raided Apple and wrecked it, there was no thought of going back. But it's really funny. People often use the analogy of a frog in boiling water as the water gets warmer and warmer, and the frog, doesn't jump until it's too late. Actually, a lot of people have done research on this. Frogs do jump. They actually get out really quickly. It's people that don't get out because you can't believe that this is actually happening. I mean, you look around, seems like the same people, same judges, same courts. They're wearing the wigs. That's all the same veneer of respectability. And then, bam, 250 people in a newsroom take off your leadership. Oh, 6 months, 8 months later, 500, police in the newsroom. You can't believe it's so unreal. And then all of a sudden, Jimmy lies in jail. All of a sudden, 75 people are dragged away. All of a sudden, your newspaper's shut down. I mean, it's just like one thing at a time. And it's like you're in shock. You actually just can't process it. You can't imagine that a place that was this free would just be throwing some of its finest citizens in jail. It's so I can't claim any prescience at all. Actually, if things had gone another way, maybe I wouldn't have left. I don't know.
When Apple Daily was raided by the Hong Kong police, you were not in Hong Kong anymore.
The first time they were raided, which was August 10th, 2020, 6 weeks after the national security law came in place, I was in Hong Kong. And we had an emergency board of directors meeting by phone, partly because of COVID, partly because of where people were. During the course of this emergency board meeting, it became clear I was the only board member in Hong Kong, not in custody. So that, does get you thinking. But by the time that the newspaper was closed so it was 8 months later, I guess, or 10 months later, in June 2021, I was in the States.
I know. Oh, go ahead.
No, it was just, again, it's just surreal. I was watching the live streaming of, first police coming in. I didn't see that live, but as they were shutting the newspaper down, and we printed 1 million copies. I mean, we were trying to keep any way we could to keep the paper going, but couldn't pay the bills, couldn't pay the staff bills, and then the government it's just unbelievable. They went after us. I think I still have, I don't know if they're still open or not, 4 different investigations against us as directors. Like, we wrecked the company. So I asked some of the my persecutors, like, you think we as directors didn't do a good job of the company? Well, what about the fact that, we couldn't have access to our bank accounts? What about the fact that the Labor Department was suing us because we didn't pay our employees? We had plenty of cash, but we couldn't access the bank accounts. The government's like, that's not our problem. You didn't pay your employees. It's this kind of petty lawfare where you use the veneer of legality to accomplish a political end. So it was just an unbelievable and horrific experience. I mean, it was traumatic for me, but more so, you have kind of survivor's guilt. I mean, besides Jimmy, there's 6 other people Apple Daily colleagues, Apple and Next Digital, the parent company, who've pled guilty and are essentially being held hostage to Jimmy's trial. I don't know why they haven't sentenced them. They've been holding them for 3+ years. So, yeah, very, very traumatic, even though me personally, I didn't really suffer in the sense of, being jailed or anything.